Hi, everyone. Thank you all for joining. Welcome to the Engage Again session, The Future of Sustainability, a panel discussion of sustainability leaders in AIDC. We want this session to be as interactive as possible. So during it, if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to put them in the chat. We have an incredible group of leaders in this space, and I would like to take a few minutes to let them introduce themselves. Megan, let's start with you.
Hi, my name is Megan Brewster. I'm Vice President of Advanced Technology at Impinj. And what I do is I foster growth in emerging opportunities to deliver the Internet of Everything at Impinj, and I inform the company's product and technology roadmaps. Prior to joining Impinj, I served at the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy, and I researched battery materials at GE Global Research.
Great, thanks, Megan. Terry?
Hi, I'm Terry Myers, and I'm the CEO and founder of Infratab. Infratab makes RF sensors specifically for monitoring the condition of products. My background is prior to Infratab, I was the founder of a company in the PC world called Quarterdeck, and prior to that at Citibank.
Okay, great. Thanks, Terry. And Carol?
Thank you, Julie. It's a pleasure to be with a really impressive panel this morning. My name is Carol Kchendurfer. Those in the industry know me as Carol K. And I have a consultancy in the fast-moving consumer goods sector, dealing with issues such as global trade, traceability, supply chains, and regulatory issues. It builds on my 20 years with the Grocery Manufacturers of America and the pharmaceutical industry, helping them manage supply chain issues.
Thanks, Carol. And I am Julie Vargas. I lead Global Food for the Identification Solutions Division at Avery Dennison. Our teams have been working on the intersection of digital identity and physical products across multiple verticals, from apparel to beauty to food, as it pertains to driving circular economies of scale to better connect production to consumption, drive true transparency and traceability, and leverage interoperable standards for global sustainability initiatives across reduction, reuse, and recyclability. For today's panel, we would like to make sure it's interactive. So throughout the session, friendly reminder, submit your thoughts and questions in the comment section. Let's start with defining circularity. A circular economy is an economic system aimed at eliminating waste and the continual use of resources. Circular systems employ repurposing, sharing, repair, refurbishment, remanufacturing, and recycling to create a system to minimize resource inputs and reduce waste, reduce pollution, and of course, reduce carbon emissions. The key to building these supply chains is to keep products, equipment, and infrastructure in use for longer periods of time, which makes accurate information on these critical resources very valuable. In all cases, the key to success is having accurate, actionable information on assets and inventory in your supply chain to enable business to create success across forecasts, waste management, and any plans for reuse. When you look at this slide, you can see how that breaks down across design, manufacturing, retail, user, reuse, and recycling in a variety of ways across a variety of industries. Examples to date include everything from consumer education through connected apparel labeling to RAIN RFID inventory optimization and better data input for recycling optimization. I would also like to hear from this panel on their definition of sustainability. Let's start with you, Carol.
Well, thank you, Julie. I think most importantly, we need to recognize that the whole issue of sustainability is far, far beyond just a corporate annual report. It is an expansive definition that moves beyond circularity, recyclability, chemicals. It has a whole expansive understanding. And how consumers look at this issue is very different. In fact, I would propose that everybody on this phone call could define sustainability in a different way. And it's not just one issue alone. All these issues overlap each other. As I mentioned, circularity overlaps climate change, overlaps recyclability, which overlaps water use. All these issues relate to one another. And I think that's exactly how consumers look at them. And so because of that, I think we need to have a common language. One of the things that you see is that the US government has literally come out and said, if you're going to use these terms, we need to have a common understanding about how to use them. And if you use them, you also have to validate them. So actually what they encourage people is not to use the term sustainability. They encourage people to be very specific about what they're talking about. The US Federal Trade Commission Green Guides for green marketing for using terms like sustainability says be very specific. Because to my earlier point, the whole idea of sustainability relates to water, relates to recyclability, relates to plastic use, relates to climate change. That's very nebulous and unclear to consumers. And the US government says to make sure that we're all speaking the same language, let's all be very clear and very specific. So as people are out there making claims about green marketing and sustainability, make sure that not only are they very specific, but they're validated through traceability. And I'll be interested in hear what others have to say.
Thanks, Carol. That's really insightful. Terry, why don't we move to you? How are you defining sustainability and the specifics around that in this discussion? And where do you see it going in the next 10 years?
Well, of course, where we are is we're about monitoring perishables and knowing their condition. And so what sustainability means to us right off is being able to cut waste and be able to deal with that waste and be able to handle a product knowing that it's about to die and what to do with it so that you don't have any waste. At the same time, because we're a sensor, we worry and we have a battery, we look at the tag and say there's another sustainability issue that is just horrible. And that is the number of sensors that could pollute the ocean. So we have two issues that we look at, but it's a mindset. It really, truly is a mindset. And it's one with the respect to the environment, and it's one that says, it's going to cost me money. And the answer is it doesn't. And if you do this correctly, you are able to have them just know when to use the product and know what to do if it's going down and the condition is getting bad. So we look at it from a point of view of, if you let this go beyond a certain condition, or we do what we call points, and it goes below a certain number of points, do something with it, make the decision. So we're there about actively trying to engage people to react before it's too late. So our whole vision is that. And what's happening in 10 years, I believe that every shipment and maybe every pallet of perishables that get shipped is going to have a condition monitor on it. And so I believe that 100% of it's going to happen. It's just going to be fait accompli. That condition monitor is there, and you're going to be able to catch, you're going to be able to know what to do, and you're going to respect that, and you're going to get rewarded when you do it right. And if you look at blockchain and you look at the entire way of track and trace, you say, I can reward, and I can reward everybody in that chain for how they handled that product. And that means it's an encouragement. So if you find that the handler of business step 3 was the one that was an abuser, you can pinpoint him and you can change it and you cannot reward him. So that's what I believe. So I believe that when you monitor condition, you can reduce the temperature, the losses due to temperature abuse to practically zero. So you can cut that 30% down that they talk about with the FDA down to, or the UN down to almost nothing. And that's what I believe is going to happen 10 years from now.
Fantastic. Thanks, Terry. What's your take, Megan?
Like Terry, I am also anticipating that 10 years from now, we're going to be far along in our journey to tag everything. So from retail apparel garments to packages to food items, like what Terry was just talking about, cartons of milk, for example, tagging literally everything with a unique digital identifier. The RAIN RFID industry enabled connectivity for more than 21 billion items in 2020. And so this is a passive technology, no batteries required. And we estimate, even though we tagged 21 billion items in 2020, this is still cumulative over the lifetime of the RAIN RFID industry. we estimate that this is only 0.2% of today's connectable items, knowing, of course, that's an exponential adoption curve. RAIN RFID is going to enable the identification, location, and authentication of every item, enabling traceability from its source to end of life. And so for sustainability, what I think this means, building on Carol's point, we can be certain of an item's provenance. We can reduce counterfeits or questionable supply chain practices. We can even minimize the culling of recalled items, which currently results in more waste. And as Julie was saying, when we were talking about circularity, we can truly enable that circular economy, ensuring that recyclable information is available for every item that's manufactured, transported, and sold. All in all, we'll be able to reduce the overproduction that used to protect us from running out of inventory or not being able to find the item that we need.
Fantastic. Thanks, Megan. And then Carol, I'll circle back to you. So what's your prediction 10 years from now? Where will we be?
I actually believe in everything that both Megan and Terry had to say. And in fact, I'm excited by it. I want to applaud both of you. Just the whole notion that we can be much more specific and help reduce pollution, be more sustainable through circularity, through sensors and the use of more precision and tracing to reduce overproduction. That's exactly where we want to be. And I think also what we're going to see is people beginning to realize that traceability, it doesn't need to be a cost for regulatory compliance alone, that we can move towards more profitable tracing of products to market and promote them as sustainable, as food safety, as to eliminate counterfeits, by recognizing that if you're tracing for profitability, you're also covering your costs for regulatory compliance, risk reduction, as well as simple supply chain logistics. There's several types of supply chain traceability, and if you do it, and if you focus on the profit, you cover your costs elsewhere. And I think all of this can be supported through RAIN, through AIDC. The future ahead looks very exciting in this area, and it looks more sustainable.
Fantastic. No, it's a great point, and I think that's one that we've, even with some of the current adoption, we've started to see kind of how do you build the case around adopting the technology from a return on investment, and then drive some incremental opportunities across the supply chain. So why don't we dig into that a little bit more? I know, Megan, our two groups have partnered extensively around multiple industries, most recently in food, taking a look at same challenges that we've seen other places that we've talked about here. We pay people a lot of money to count things incorrectly, and then build predictive ordering, on top of that. And then across the supply chain, our traceability and our ability to, surgically attack recall scenarios has been challenging without exact data. So if we think about those, what are the other lessons that we've learned about sustainability from those digitization deployments in both food and retail apparel that could apply to other industries that are adopting these technologies?
This is a great question. And Julie, I'm with you. I'm very excited by the deployments that our companies have done together, as well as a number of deployments happening in new emerging markets by a number of RAIN Alliance members. And it's true, we are learning lessons in existing industries that we can apply to these emerging industries, be it food, be it healthcare, et cetera. So one of the key lessons that we've learned again and again is that for successful RAIN RFID deployments, is that inventory visibility really allows you to sell down to the very last item. So this reduces the need for excess inventory and overproduction. In the food industry, this can reduce perishable waste due to expiration, similar to what Terry was talking about earlier. One recent example is Golden State Foods and IBM have found that RAIN RFID enables them to ensure beef patties stay refrigerated and thus fresh as they move through the supply chain from manufacturing through distribution and finally to those restaurants and customers. As more and more retailers offer omni-channel operations, it's critical that companies know exactly where and which items they have in each location so that a customer in one location can get their item from another location, another store. A recent report by ECR quoted a company that was able to improve their online order accuracy and that reduced their incorrect orders and customer complaints by 90% with adoption of RFID. And of course, we're also seeing more consumers asking for sustainable products and holding their favorite brands to higher sustainability standards. In fast fashion retail, this could mean improving the end of life recycling for clothing items. In supply chains, this could be greater use of reusable transport items like totes and pallets, and giving confidence in the item's provenance. So proving that they've used sustainable and responsible raw materials in production.
Right. Yeah, and it's they're fascinating stats. So that circularity and the impact that can have on the rebirth of items is significant. And I know just a fast stat around food. You know, we were sitting before the pandemic, approximately a third of the global food produced for human consumption actually ended in landfills. The most recent study from WWF shows that's increased, unfortunately, to about 40%. And many people think that's what we, leave on our plate at the end of dinner. There is a piece of this that is in our homes and consumer consumption, but a large portion of it, almost half, also comes from the supply chain. So it's easy to see how that can translate around. Inventory optimization now becomes something that can not just drive sell through before it expires, but also how you just get better at tying the two together, what you're producing and distributing to what's being consumed or needed in the marketplace. So I'd love to hear. So sold, I think, we're preaching a bit to the choir here, but I do think that one of the things that we talk about a lot is there are also kind of there's a bit of challenge around adopting these. And so what I'd like to do is flip to the other side of this coin and understand, we'll start with you, Carol, why move from a paper-based system? So some of these emerging technologies seem like they're cost efficient, they're expensive, it's hard to change. How do I utilize this to the best of its abilities? And what's the impetus to take the step to move off of paper-based systems out there today?
I think there are really two, maybe even three critical reasons. First and foremost is we're living in a pandemic, and it doesn't look like it's going to be disappearing anytime soon. And so that means we're going to see deliveries right to the doorsteps of consumers more and more. And that's exactly where nearly a third of the growth in the industry the past year or the past 5 years has come because of pandemic forced supply chain logistics, mobility. And that means more and more businesses are going to want to respond to consumers with at-home deliveries. And as you have that just to the doorstep delivery, that means more information capture. That means to make sure that there's a frictionless delivery. And more businesses, from retailers, from manufacturers, are going to want to support that kind of consumer satisfaction. So for just supply chain logistics and mobile demand, you're going to see those infrastructure for product tracing put in place to meet what the marketplace needs now amidst the pandemic. So if you want to be in business, you got to do what the marketplace and what consumers are demanding, and that's mobility, digital traceability, and data capture. But if you even look beyond that, for 30 years now, we've been moving more towards consumer demand in the marketplace for sustainability, for circularity, for recyclable, and to have ethical products. And yeah, people want to say that this is just among young people, or it's just among millennials, or what Gen X. It's like, no, that may have been true 5, 10, 15 years ago. Now what you're seeing across every demographic of every region, of every age group, every gender, that we are seeing a move towards people wanting to buy products that are more natural, more sustainable, organic, reduced chemical applications. And that means for the companies that are looking to promote the responsible, ethical, sustainable way, that there's a potential profit margin to be had. And again, to my earlier point, if you can capture those products delivered to the doorstep with a profit, You cover your costs for supply chain logistics, setting up a digital network, setting up the regulatory compliance systems that frankly need to be set up, but you end up in a more profitable place. But all because consumers in the marketplace are going there, and that's where the demand is.
Fantastic. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. We've all changed a lot of our core habits, especially this past year. I'd like to dig even deeper in that. So I'll actually go to you, Terry. I mean, let's talk about the additional attributes you mentioned. Where is the benefit for consumers there, and why move off of a paper-based system for some of those attributes?
I'm going to go back a little bit to even the benefit for the manufacturer and then get to the consumer. As I said, we do sensors and we're concerned with condition, but the one constant, and we work with barcodes, we work with temperature loggers, and we're like an add-on. So, but the one key thing we have is we have this simple concept that says that a perishable life starts at 100 and it goes to 0. And so we know, we do budgets for what you expect the shelf life or the condition to be used for each business step. So that starts, including what's expected from the ingredient that's coming in. Because if the ingredient coming in is not very good, your product that's made is terrible. So the move toward away from paper to condition monitoring is about finding out where the problem is. Well, come this fish got to Whole Foods and it has little worms in it. Where did that come from? And so a lot of it is about trying to understand the processes and trying to understand just how to make a better product. When it comes to the consumer, it's about getting the best flavor. And it's about getting maybe the best nutrition, but we really focus on flavor. And what it's about there is if you know a range of what the product is that you're buying, that it's coming in with these points and its points are between 80 and 70, you have an idea of what your flavor preference is. And so you begin, if you're a chef, you begin to say, I like that recipe with mushy lemons or mushy whatever. And this one really needs something a firm mango. And so you have an ability to begin to get a sense of how you specialize on the different specialty foods, craft beer, cheeses, or whatever, as to what you're doing. And if you're one of these individuals that is making cheese, then it's really important. If you're somebody who's a coffee connoisseur, it becomes a question of discerning. And so we're finding it based upon the preference of the people, and it plays in that you need to ride on top of either a barcode or ride on top of rain in order to be able to get that information. And so we look at it differently.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think there's so many layers to this. Megan, same question, kind of why move off the paper-based system when some of these emerging technologies seem like a cost addition?
The truth is RAIN RFID is a proven technology. It's been deployed at scale around the world in a variety of industries. Although it may seem daunting to move from a paper-based system, a lot of companies are doing this. And the reason why is because they're finding significant return on investment. As you've heard from the other panelists, there's a variety of benefits from moving to a digital capture system, both for your original use case, but there's a number of spillover use cases. Once everything's tagged, there's a lot you can do in terms of optimizing your operations. So for example, Accenture found 10% return on investment for retailers that have fully adopted RFID. And we have so many customer stories to illustrate this, so I'm just going to give you two. For example, Highland Home, they were able to save each of their stores around 250 hours of labor per month. And they were able to increase their warehouse's intake capacity by 5 times by moving from a paper-based system to RAIN RFID. Another example is Undi's lingerie. They've increased their stock handling productivity by more than 55%, and they increased their checkout productivity by over 40%. So you can clearly see how that upfront initial investment pays off very quickly by improved and efficient operations in the stores and throughout the supply chain.
Fantastic. Well, good. So the business case is there. Along the same lines, I know, what other challenges are out there? Are there any other things that brands or retailers face across their supply chains that may prevent their ability to become more sustainable or adopt these technologies? And I'll start with you, Megan.
What we've seen, and again, this is lessons learned from other industries that have deployed RAIN RFID at scale, is that the biggest challenge to sustainability truly is inventory visibility. So as we've discussed, knowing exactly what you have and where across your stores and across your supply chain really enables you to sell down to the last item. That reduces overproduction, which currently is acting a little bit like a security blanket for the fear of running out of stock of particular items. I think one of the most exciting parts about RAIN RFID is exactly as I just mentioned, that it enables so much more than in inventory visibility. Once you've tagged every item for the purposes of inventory visibility, you have so many spillover benefits. So now you can, for example, identify counterfeits. You can manage your returns. You can turn stores into micro-fulfillment centers. And that's where you really start to see the unlocking of so many new use cases that are enabled by tagging every item. And that's where you just continue to see more and more increase in your ROI of that upfront investment.
Same question to you, Carol. What other challenges should brands and retailers be aware of?
I think increasingly you're going to just see the whole supply chain issue stared down. And at some point, there's going to be such demand among suppliers themselves, the linkages, the supply chains, the supplier-customer relationships. They're going to demand accountability, visibility, digital. And moving away from paper is just going to be no longer acceptable. At some point, past or passive behaviors have to be eradicated. And I think increasingly that, it's the good, better, best. The best are demanding that the premier customer supplier relationships are going to be those that are visible, that are digital, and that have these networks in place. And that means that if you want to be a viable business in today's marketplace, whether to sell sustainable products to consumers, to provide promptness, speed, efficiency, and reduced waste for your immediate retail customers, and to deliver those products to the doorstep frictionless, you're going to have to be digital, have this network, and have the linkages established. And if you're not, you're no longer going to be the premier supplier.
Yeah, table stakes, right? Interesting.
Yeah.
Terry, anything else you want to add around some of the challenges out there for the technology adoption?
Or I can give an opportunity that I think is important. First, let me say that all of our tags are both RAIN and NFC and have a sensor. And we did that so that if there was somebody that was in a small location, they were able to, and didn't know anything about RAIN, they could use an NFC phone and get the information about the temperature and the condition. Lately, we've been working on a COVID project, and that COVID project is about knowing what the temperature is when it comes into the final last mile. And that final last mile, we're looking at somebody, the use case is Alabama, Mississippi, where the number of people who are getting vaccinated, we didn't know this when we started, was slight and unpredictable. And you had 3 different kinds of vaccines, each one providing a logger that they used when it was in the container, and when the vaccine got out of the container, there was no way you're supposed to get your own thing and be able to manage whether you had it out of the case for more than 7 minutes or more than 10 minutes, how long it was in the refrigerator, how long it was before it got into the syringe, and all these things. And at first it seemed daunting if it was just Pfizer. But then when it was Pfizer and it was Moderna and it was Johnson & Johnson, and you could expect all of these in Alabama at this center, you said, oh my God. So the purpose of the tagging was to also act as an assistant to these people who were trying to manage these vaccines, to know what to take out of the freezer, what to take, what was into the refrigerator and in the vaccine bottle, and be able to go all the way to, the patient. But the idea more was to ensure that the efficacy of that vaccine was sufficient to be able to give it to them. Because if you were out in Dodger Stadium and it was hot, it might be toast. And so it had to do with working with the brands to be able to get that information, to be able to then convey that. And with RAIN and with NFC and with a simple indicator that said that you better get it out of the refrigerator right now, it offered solutions to service providers. And so we haven't mentioned service providers, but I think service providers, meaning the clinic people, the nurses, whatever, I think that's an important segment that needs to be supported and for which is really important. And so I look at it, we're in odd places where everybody is worrying about, the supply chain. We're about worrying about processes. And so it's a little different, but I thought I'd sort of, put that in as as an idea for what we do that's a little different.
Yeah, it's really interesting because I think there's so much around condition and state. And so we're talking about kind of augmenting all the layers of data, not just for visibility, but how do we capture them digitally and then decision them accordingly. So that's a great relevant example of that, Terry. Well, let's take that to the next level. So it's not just enough to know the data, to see it, to be able to action it. I'd love to hear from this team, what is the role of standards and driving capability for increased sustainability? And I'll start with you, Carol.
Well, I want to go back to a point that Terry just made that I just think is infinitely important. You have the consumer who has expectations, whether they are a patient, whether they are a grocery store, we are putting so much pressure on service providers, whether they are the people in the store, in the hospitals, and they cannot make decisions. They cannot provide safe and efficacious drugs, vaccines. They cannot provide an indication of when a product is going to be delivered unless there's complete digital standard information. And Terry, your point is so critical because it's easy to set the expectations. But if you can't deliver upon them, that's where the friction, so to speak, arises. And I think we've all become so accustomed to having on-demand purchases and expectations. And if we don't set up the systems to provide and meet those expectations, we're in a future of failure ahead of us. So Terry, I'm totally with you. It's all about processes and putting in place systems of integrity. And I think that gets to your question, Julie, which is standards. We have to be speaking the same language. And at the end of the day, we have to have that common language. If that common language is GS1 standards, if that common language is AIDC, at the end of the day, the Tower of Babel brought down most of civilization because we were speaking too many different languages and we had different expectations. So I'm all with you with ISO standards and supporting a common language, a common vision. And I think in that process, what you also see is you eliminate redundancy, you eliminate cost, and you have a sense of the conversation and the supply chain linkages are talking to one another in a way we expect them to.
Yeah, that spot on. That interoperability for speed is going to be one of the critical elements. Any other thoughts, Megan, on the role of standards for these capabilities?
Yes, standards are clearly the common language for interoperability amongst supply chain partners and how we communicate with end consumers. A big opportunity that I'm seeing is how we link the standardized recycling terminology that Carol mentioned at the very beginning of the panel with the unique item identifier, the number that we encode on the tag. So we've generally focused a lot of standards development to describe the trade item through that encoding. So for example, this is a can of soda. It is manufactured by this entity. Perhaps, this is the volume of liquid that's in that bottle. But perhaps we focus less on the packaging itself. So what does the recycler need to know when they receive that bottle so that they can appropriately recycle or reuse that bottle? One really interesting caveat is the standardized definition of raw materials, both what they are, but also how they were processed. And then how do we link that information to that unique number that's encoded on the tag? So for example, maybe we're working with a textile, but that textile has been treated with an antimicrobial coating. And so that changes how we would recycle that textile otherwise.
Interesting. Yeah, it's that common language and the role of standards. It's interesting today, in today's world, there's no way to even validate kind of on paper and pencil what that looks like. And so the complement of standards and digitization really unlocks quite a bit. So I'd love to hear as well, can you share some examples of sustainability deployments that you or your organization have taken part of? How does this come to life? And while the panel is sharing, please remember, if you have any ideas, thoughts, what are some of your challenges in the audience or some of your ideas on how we can really drive scaled sustainability, please don't forget to enter them in the chat. So when it comes back to examples of deployments, let's go ahead and start with you, Megan, on some of those in the marketplace.
Great. There's a couple that I want to share that I'm really excited about. The first is sustainable cotton. I think this is a great success story where many brands have been able to enable sustainable cotton using Rain RFID, specifically Rain RFID equipped harvesters manufactured by John Deere. And they're using these for logistical management, asset tracking, product traceability, and precision agriculture regarding fiber quality mapping. So by using that John Deere harvester, for example, ID Cotton has developed an RFID solution that's being used by Brazil's largest cotton producer. And by using this Rain RFID enabled equipment, they are able to facilitate yard management and processing. They can avoid contamination of the cotton varieties, and they can ensure the final quality of the product. Cotton Leads is another example of a cotton traceability program that is enabling sustainable cotton supply chains in Australia and the United States. And another recent example that's a favorite of mine is the farm-to-table strawberry traceability that's enabled by Cooperative Hochstrassen. So every year, more than 200 family businesses are carefully picking, selling, and presenting over 300 million kilograms of strawberries to local stores and international resellers. So by incorporating Rain RFID into their cardboard containers, they're now able to provide all the way down to the end customer that accurate information about their food source.
Fantastic. Terry, some examples from your world.
I'm going to give you an example of fish. And this is from farm fish, sea bass, and sea bream. And it starts on the boat at catch, and it goes through the processor, through the retail distribution center, through the retail store, into the retail refrigerator, and then to the customer who has bought the fish. And with the purpose of being able to know again that the quality of the fish is safe and good and has a certain taste. The retailer is Ahold, the aquaculture, a number of aquaculture farms in Europe. And a lot of it has to do with Ahold had shelf life curves for their fish, so they knew what the expected life would be. They also are so quality conscious that they have a time on their on the package that says when it's expired and when they should get rid of it. So our job was to show that our tags exactly mimicked Ahold shelf life for the fish, and which we did. And as we went through, so we knew how much shelf life in these points, how much shelf life was used on the boat, how much shelf life was used in the pack house, how much shelf life was used, whatever. And we arrived at the customer or at the consumer, and we found that Ahold was throwing away the fish a day early than what the calculations were, just because they wanted the quality. And it was so inspiring that was the case. And so that led to the sustainability part. They said there is certain fish catches where we're not getting this, and we actually have to throw away a lot of the fish because of a process called gaping, or a disease, a thing, an infirmity of the fish called gaping, which means that they've left the fish out from the time of catch to when it got frozen too long. And as a result, it develops scaling, and then they have to look at it, they do a visual check, and they have to throw it away. And of course, they throw it away because they have such good quality. And so we were able to determine with them and with the shelf life and with their lab and their scientists how long it needed to how long it had to go into the freezer before it had gaping. And that saved, I can't remember the percentage, but it was enormous. And it's those little things. Again, it's a process. And it's that one process where they discovered that there was something wrong that allowed you to actually not scrap. And that's my story.
That's fantastic. And Carol, I'll move to you for the last example.
Well, I actually endorse some of the examples that have been given. I've worked in the seafood area. I've worked in the biotech area. I've worked with the whole chemical applications. So each of these areas I've worked in. But I actually want to throw it out to the folks in the audience here. What are some of the problems they're having in not putting these systems in place? And where do you see opportunities, profitable opportunities, to do just that? Because the real question is we know where the marketplace is going. You just heard several examples of real leadership and exciting opportunities and movement in the marketplace. What's holding you back? And maybe that's a question I throw out to them that we can address during the Q&A.
Great, thanks, Carol. And the Q&A is coming up, so everyone get those ready. We can't wait to hear from you. So that first of all, I just want to thank each of you, incredibly esteemed panel, not just around the opportunity from a carbon footprint perspective, but also from a financial one. And so I do want to hit on a few of the key points from today's session. First of all, we heard quite a bit around the blind spots. The data, when it does exist, is not necessarily in a system that can be used from a digital, for digital optimization, or that data could be inaccurate. We also know that we need new data sets. So not just what is out there, where it is, but also the condition and origin of those products. We all heard a bit about what is activated from a digital perspective, and it's still less than 1% of all items. So there is an opportunity there to really drive. Carol mentioned the leadership in this space that is moving quickly, and soon it really will be table stakes, not just from a performance perspective for your own supply chains and your retail environments, but most importantly, consumers. We are in the driver's seat. The supply chains, brands, and retailers must really evolve to meet the needs of the new consumer. And that's not just about product information or availability, but how they're going to, source those products, and then also make sure that they have truly a sustainable life and a sustainable rebirth. And across that, we saw that in most industries, razor thin margins aren't going to have enough room to service these new consumer demands without taking time to really automate and drive accurate data that is interoperable through the language of standards. So across the entire discussion, I think we learned that if you want to be a high performer, it's not just about building more sustainable, more transparent supply chains, but also driving consumer satisfaction to make sure your revenue remains or grows, and ultimately driving inventory optimization, driving traceability that will result in bottom line financial results. And with that, again, thank you to our expert panelists, and I'd like to open it up to questions from the audience.